Joining me right now, Mark McCluskey, who, as you know, him and his wife Patricia went viral in late June after an angry mob broke through a private gate, trespassed on private property. Audible threats were heard in multiple different video clips, and they, of course, were defending themselves as people normally are, kind of do when faced with an angry mob. And everyone's familiar with the story, but what they may not be as familiar with, Mark, is some of the latest developments happening in your case. I want to get your thoughts on that before we get into the Gardner and these accusations that are flying now from multiple people as to whether or not the St. Louis City prosecutor actually tampered with evidence in order to secure a felony charge against your wife. This is crazy. First off, Mark, welcome to the show. What is the latest?
Well, it is crazy. I mean, it's not a rumor. I mean, the circuit attorney's office admits it in the charging documents that when the pistol was given to the police department, it was inoperable. It was not a functioning weapon. It was not readily capable of lethal use. And they were instructed by the assistant circuit attorney to disassemble the pistol, fix it, make it work, reassemble it, then test it. And after having taken it apart, fixed it, reassembled it, and then test fired it, declared that it was a functioning handgun, and therefore the element of the charge had been satisfied and they could charge my wife.
Unbelievable. And we have linked, it was KSDK, an NBC affiliate there, 5 on your side, and we have that linked up at the website, as well as the PDF of the probable cause, the affidavit, and then the documents from the crime lab, which the first sentence read, the firearm could not be test fired as submitted because it was purposefully and knowingly, you knew it was inoperable. The spring was in and the pin were in opposite order. So as a result of it not being assembled in the proper way, it was inoperable. And that was because it was used as a prop in a case that you had been working on. So how was that a readily capable weapon that can be used lethally?
Well, it can't be. And the real world, my wife, if you gave her every tool in the tool room and an unlimited amount of time, she would never be able to disassemble that pistol, figure out what was wrong with it, put it back together and make it work. It was as readily capable of lethal use in her hands in the condition it was in at the time of these events as 40 ounces of aluminum.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, it was a paperweight. I mean, that's all it was. And she, it was a paperweight, and she knew it was a paperweight out there. What gets me is that, so looking at the document, they disassembled it. They discovered the improper way in which the spring was in front of the pin, etc. And they put it back together, test fired it successfully. And it was on that basis that they decided to go ahead and lodge this Class C felony charge against your wife. So I haven't ever actually quite seen anything like this, and I noticed that the fact that her firearm, her handgun, was inoperable. It wasn't mentioned in that July 20th sworn affidavit. Now, as I understand it, the pistol was turned in 9 days before this affidavit that this Bergendorf, the St. Louis detective here, signed off on this. So they had 9 days to realize that this was inoperable, and yet they went ahead and excluded that from this affidavit. Correct?
I think that's correct. I think it's just amazing. I mean, if there's ever a reason to not vote for Democrats, and there's a whole list of reasons, and I was watching Attorney General Barr on television today and came up with about 6 dozen more, but if there's ever a reason to not vote for Democrats, it's when they have to go to this length to fake up evidence, to charge somebody with a crime, when in fact all they did was walk out there with a paperweight, as you say, to try to defend themselves against a mob. I mean, imagine my wife, right? She's, 60-year-old young lady with a gun that she knows doesn't work, marching out into a mob to try to keep them away from our house. I mean, who's a hero in this situation? And it certainly isn't Kim Gardner.
Well, and I even wrote on the website that, to me, the only criminal actions that I see in any of this are the tampering of evidence and then the omission of this from this sworn affidavit. So when we spoke with Missouri AG Eric Schmidt, And at the time, this was even before we knew this, because this was like a week and a half ago. We spoke with him, and we mentioned the fact that it had been reported that, you know, the firearm was unloaded, et cetera. And I brought that up to him. I said, does that even satisfy the state statute of having like this firearm that's capable of lethality? And, you know, that's not the exact way that the law states it, but you get my drift. And he said it's entirely irrelevant from Missouri's Castle Doctrine, first and foremost, that it doesn't matter what condition the firearm is in. It's entirely irrelevant from the fact that there were people who trespassed a mob of individuals, and it ceased being a peaceful demonstration when property was damaged and threats were shouted. And so as a result, none of that Gardner's office could bring up really has any bearing on the exercise of Castle Doctrine. So give me your thoughts on this, and really ultimately your thoughts on Gardner's insistence to fast track your case over every other case that apparently is waiting, including murders and arson and all kinds of stuff.
Well, and she has, at least from what my understanding, like the lowest conviction rate of any circuit attorney we've ever had.
And prosecution rate.
But here's the thing. I was watching the Attorney General on in congressional hearings this morning. Apparently the left is attempting to redefine peaceful protest as defacing buildings, burning buildings, smashing cars, setting fires, setting off explosive devices, throwing bottles of flammable liquids or urine or bleach or frozen bottles. All of that is now within the definition of the left's concept of a peaceful protest. And so if they don't actually kill you, if they just beat you maybe, that's considered a peaceful protest to Jerry Nadler and his crew. And therefore, you should not be allowed to defend yourself against it as an individual or as the Department of Justice. If it's just, you know, looting and burning and smashing and throwing bottles at cops and hospitalizing policemen and giving them concussions and things like that, just let them do it, because that's the new definition of peaceful protest. And if you stand up against it, you're the bad guy. You're the stormtrooper. You're the criminal in my case, and in my wife's case. If you stand up against criminal activity, because that criminal activity is now sanctioned by the powers that be in these Democrat cities, powers that be that I think actually favor the concept of having a Marxist take over the country and the destruction of capitalist democracy and everything we live and stand for. It's not accidental.
Yeah.
And when you now have this battle between the Justice Department of the United States trying to preserve our form of government and elected officials who are actively working to undermine it, it's a very frightening situation, and it's a situation that's coming soon to a neighborhood near you.
Yeah, well, and this all playing out, and you're absolutely right. As you said in your first interview, that it's not a protest, it's a revolution. And to your point about the Department of Justice, I know that Senator Josh Hawley has requested the DOJ watch this case to make sure that the right of self-defense is protected. Congressman Louis Gohmert, we spoke with him last week, has done the same. Obviously, Missouri AG Eric Schmidt, many other congressional members too. And do you think it's wise, considering that this time of national unrest began as a question about policing reform, for a very politically minded and embattled, she has got a re-election coming up August 4th, prosecutor and a member, this individual, this detective that signed off on this affidavit, to essentially fabricate evidence to target individuals during this time when all of this began as a question of law and order, criminal justice, and policing?
Yeah. Well, let me parse out a little bit here. I think that the police officer that signed off was doing his job, and I think he was doing it under the direction, well, I know because it expressly says so, under the direction of the Assistant Circuit Attorney, Chris Hinckley. Okay? I don't suspect that this would have happened without pressure from the Circuit Attorney's office. So I can never blame law enforcement for doing their job, doing as they're instructed to do by their superiors. They have to do what they're asked to do.
True.
But it's the Circuit Attorney's office that was pushing this. And it's the Circuit Attorney's office which, and this isn't the first go around for Kim Gardner, we can call our attention to the Eric Greitens matter, but when you have to resort to tampering with evidence, to creating evidence as an essential element of the charge, it is an essential element of the charge of exhibiting that the weapon be readily capable of lethal use. Yeah. And if you have to take it apart, rearrange it, and put it back together, that ain't readily capable.
No, that's not readily capable at all. I'm curious as to, and this is me not being a lawyer, whether or not there are legal options at your disposal to maybe pursue some, I don't know if it's a civil suit or what, as a result of this. I don't know if it's if there's a federal statute that provides. I questioned this actually last night in discussions about this, whether or not there's a federal statute that affords you some sort of legal remedy to protect yourselves against abuse of state authority or not. Have you explored that option, you and your wife, at all?
It's certainly something that's under consideration, and the first and foremost, the federal statute at issue is the United States Constitution. I mean, we've got a right to bear arms. We've got a right to defend ourselves. State law in Missouri and the Castle Doctrine gives us an absolute right to do what we did. But above and beyond that, you shouldn't have a prosecutor that has to fake evidence in order to get a conviction.
That's
I mean,
right.
how can you support the rule of law if you have to violate it in order to pretend to get there?
Yeah, and if Kim Gardner is going to fabricate evidence in your case, who's to say that that has not been done in previous cases or would not be done in future cases?
And this is a microcosm of what's going on. Just as we're attempting to create evidence to defame and try to impeach the president, if the people that are in charge of the administration of justice don't mind faking and lying and distorting in order to reach their goals and then use that for political purposes, how can anyone have faith in their government? How can anyone believe that there is going to be justice? Because if you're on the wrong side of things politically, they can use their power to persecute you, prosecute you, imprison you, and it's a pretty significant risk for the average person. I mean, that intimidation, that threat is what keeps most people from talking, keeps most people from telling the truth, keeps most people from standing up against the mob because they're afraid they're going to be crushed by social intimidation, by their own neighbors who are trying to protect themselves against social intimidation, and from the force of the government itself. It's intimidating.
And I think that
and
when
it's meant to be intimidating.
yes, and when people do stand up to the mob, I hope that Americans rally around those individuals who do. Last question for you, Mark McCloskey. When do you get your guns back?
I don't know. As far as the guns that were taken by the search warrant, I don't know when we get those back. I assume that when we're eventually exonerated from these charges. The good news is that because we didn't have to get bonded out. If you're on bond in Missouri, you can't possess a weapon. But since we've not been bonded out, I can possess weapons, and I certainly do.
You can possess a lot of weapons. That's the good thing. That's the good thing. Mark McCloskey, always enjoy talking with you. Please keep us updated as to the developments in this case, because I know it sort of feels like you and your wife against the world, but there are a lot of people who are right there with you, and they sort of feel like they're standing there with you against the world as well. So please keep us and everyone else updated, and God bless. We'll continue to watch.